Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for tuning in. And I'm going to dive straight in with a few questions. Which of these offices would you prefer to work in and why? Which of these pig farm buildings do you think looks the most pleasant space to spend time in and why? Which of these cow sheds would you prefer to work in and why?
Chris, I've got a lag on your slides.
Okay, I'll just shift ahead then.
Yeah, just be aware, I've now got pigs on my screen. I don't know whether any of the other panelists want to come in, but brilliant. Just to let you know, there's a bit of a lag.
Okay, are we now on how our buildings make us feel? Yeah, okay. So our buildings, the way our buildings are designed and the buildings that we live and work in profoundly affect our well-being and our mental psychology. And during this scholarship, I've been looking at how we can make sure that our livestock housing is designed in a way that's, really good, healthy spaces for us to work in. So today I'm going to talk through three things: how our buildings make us feel and why, and the theory and science behind that. We're going to have a look at where we're at now in terms of livestock housing design and some innovative examples that I saw on my travels. And then just ask ourselves, is this a question of building design, or do we need to ask a bigger picture about how we farm? So the first thing that I did was to step away from farming completely and to speak to various experts in design, psychology, architecture, neuroscience. And the main message that I got was that the human beings, we all need to interact with the natural world, and there are huge benefits from doing so. And the word that describes this need for nature that we have is biophilia. And in essence, it's all about the fact that we came from nature. We used to live in much more natural surroundings. And even though we now spend a lot of time in buildings, in our homes and in offices and such, we still have a deep need in our biology to connect to nature and to experience it. And in nature, we're used to seeing complexity all the time: complex shapes, colors, textures, patterns, light and shadow. The natural world is a very dynamic environment. There's things constantly moving, and we're used to seeing that. And we're used to having certain views of the landscape around us at different distances. So the top right-hand picture on this slide shows an example of a concept called prospect and refuge, which is that we like to see what's in front of us and what we have to deal with, whether it's opportunities or threats to us. And because we have only a certain field of vision, we like to feel safe from behind. And this is an instinct that goes right back to when we sat at the mouth of caves, and it's still playing out now in our genetics and our biology. And that's why we sit where we do in restaurants. We like to be typically against a protective surface, and we like to see what's going on around us with the diners, who's coming in and out and such. So if we remove ourselves from all this in man-made buildings that feel unnatural, it's not good for us. And so we need to just think about how we're going to design our spaces. What does this mean for building design in practice? Well, lots of designers and architects are building spaces now, which the main priority of those buildings is to make people inside them feel as connected as possible to the natural world outside. So we're looking at things like large windows with views outside, plenty of natural light, use of natural materials, colors and patterns, and incorporating the curves and shapes that we see in the natural world in the building structure. Rather than quite simple shapes that we typically have been building, and bringing nature into the space literally with lots of indoor planting where we can. And this is called biophilic design. And these kind of buildings, this kind of design is making a huge difference to the people who use them. This is not hippie stuff. You've got children performing better at school, office staff more focused, happier, more productive. Businesses are generating more income from that. Hospital patients are recovering quicker from illness or surgery. So this is real practical results from different types of building design. It's measurable stuff. What about the farmer's working environment? Well, typically the good news is that farmers have traditionally had one of the best working environments of any profession, and it has its challenges, especially with the weather, especially at the moment, but it's a big part of why so many of us have chosen a life in farming. But in more recent times, as farmers have been pushed by the market to produce more efficiently, more intensively, more productively, we're not only managing larger numbers of animals in our systems, but also we've got quite a different feel to our working environments. And for some time, I've wondered whether there's any link between how our working environments as farmers have evolved and growing mental health crisis in our industry. Is that to do with financial pressures, social pressures, or does the building itself have anything to do with that? And this isn't a criticism of farmers or our production systems. It's about making sure that we have good, healthy spaces to work in. So where are we at now? Well, our livestock buildings have evolved, and understandably, they've become practical, low maintenance spaces that are easy to clean, disinfect, muck out. Typically, they're portal framed, steel portal framed, and the overall construction is similar in appearance to the sort of structures you see in industry on, for example, industrial estates and such. Mainly, they're built from man-made materials such as plastic, steel, concrete, fibre cement. Still great to see some natural materials in there with timber cladding on sides of buildings, and when we use natural materials inside, such as straw bedding and other similar natural fibre bedding, that looks visually better. Some buildings, like the one on the top right of this slide, have plenty of natural light, and some are electrically illuminated. Some have natural colours, and a lot of cladding on buildings is that green. So you're seeing a lot of greens in buildings, but some without natural colours. But the big one is that some feel quite open still, whereas some have become quite an enclosed environment. And that's in conflict with what we learned earlier about design and psychology. So on my travels, I visited the Netherlands, Germany, the USA, and Canada to try and find some building examples that followed more biophilic principles. And the bottom three on this slide were actually ones that I saw towards the end of my studies. But all of it's online, so I was able to visit them. But all of these buildings on this slide, you know, they're good examples of how curved shapes, natural materials, views outside, natural light, and in the case of the pig building on the top right of this picture, even indoor planting, that's a Dutch pig building, you know, make those places a better working environment. And if you notice as well, at the ground floor level, it's still a very practical and durable space. But above a certain height, the overall structure can be whatever we want it to be. We don't have to design what we're currently building. And what the buildings on this slide all have in common is that they're not focused on creating a climate-controlled environment. And that kind of brings us on to a bigger question, really. So I had a meeting in New York with a guy called Rich Wenner, lovely guy. And Rich is a professor of psychology specializing in prison design and how those buildings affect the behavior of inmates and staff. And what he said to me was, how a prison building ends up looking and feeling depends on the view of the designer of what an inmate is and what they're trying to achieve. So are we looking at a dangerous individual that society needs protecting from by this individual being locked away? Or is this someone who's a human being who's made some mistakes and needs help to reform? And that'll have a big difference on the building design that's the outcome. And in the same way, the first question we need to ask ourselves as farmers is, how do we see our animals and how do we want to manage them? Are they a part of our farm that we move around in a symbiotic way with soils and crops in rotation? Or are we focusing on producing them as efficiently as possible, even if that's indoors full time? And how we answer that question will influence our building design, because that fundamental question is what will dictate whether we're building a shelter for when animals can't be out on land during certain times of year, or a production facility. And neither of those are wrong, but it influences the design output. And what we've learned earlier is that an enclosed environment which feels separate from nature and is built from unnatural materials isn't a healthy space for a person to be spending a lot of time in as a working environment. And I've spoken to many farmers over the last couple of years about this. And actually, when discussing some of these more intensive systems, a few of them have actually cried when we've been discussing this topic. It's been difficult discussions. How do they feel about their buildings and the production systems and where they work and what their working day is like? And I'm convinced that there is a mental health issue here, and we need to make design improvements to try and make those people's lives better, because we're talking about good people here who work hard and care about their animals, and they deserve to have a healthy space. So what is the best way to be rearing animals? How should we be managing them? Well, I've become increasingly convinced that from what I've seen, the issue here is that we've broken down farming into distinct activities, and then we've focused on each one and making it more productive and efficient in isolation. And we've been very successful at that. But sometimes we've lost sight of the bigger picture, which is that animals and land are interconnected and should be managed in a harmonious way together. So in my opinion, we fundamentally need a return to mixed farming systems where we coordinate livestock, soils and crops in a circular way that harnesses natural cycles. And that means putting animals back on the land and managing them in the right way, which gives them and us a healthier, more natural working life. What does that mean, though, for building design? Well, firstly, if we're doing that, we can provide a lot of shelter naturally, actually, with trees, woodland and hedges. And those are the best types of shelter because they don't require any carbon footprint or energy or cost to build. They build themselves, they're sequestering carbon, they're providing various other environmental benefits. So the more we can provide natural shelter without buildings, the better, frankly. Secondly, we can use portable shelters. We already use these on some farms, such as in the bottom left of this slide. If we wanted to improve the design of those, I'm sure we could with some design input. They may be fine as they are. But mainly, where we do need to build permanent buildings, we don't have to stick to what we've been building recently. You know, we can, above that practical ground floor area, we can be more adventurous. So on this page, there's some excellent examples of different types of structures, showing how we can design and build in more intelligent ways. And some designers are taking inspiration from nature to make sure they're getting the strongest possible structure with the minimum amount of materials. For example, learning from things like spiders' webs. Others are using computer modeling software to design really beautiful curved structures and figure out how to actually build that in practice. So there's some really exciting new architecture happening. It brings opportunities to build better, more beautiful spaces for us to work in. And finally, as a summary, the key messages from this study are: building design profoundly affects our well-being, and that can't be overstated. We really should pay more attention to designing the spaces where we're spending time. Farmers deserve livestock housing which provides a good working environment, a good place for their animals to live, and which is visually appealing to our fellow citizens, so we can reconnect with them and be confident in what they see our farms as. Successful building design comes from a place of what is the right ethos for the activity within the building? How should we rear animals? We need to think about that first. And lastly, we don't have to stick to the norm. We can build really beautiful, intelligent and natural structures which improve our working lives. A big thank you to everyone who's listened today, to all of us, and to the Nuffield Farming Scholarships Trust for what's been an amazing couple of years as a journey. Made some great friends and met many lovely people. And I'm grateful to the John Oldacre Foundation who sponsored my scholarship. And a big thank you to 1 million people, and that's all at the end of my report, so I won't say them now, but thank you to everyone who helped me throughout, from family, friends, work colleagues, and the people I met. I'm grateful for your time, and we'll welcome any questions.